Ever get the feeling that there are stories and beliefs we just take for granted? They're like background noise. But then you stop and look closer, and suddenly you realize there might be a whole lot more going on than you ever imagined.
It's almost like peeling back a layer of reality, isn't it? And that's exactly what we're doing in this deep dive. Today, we're tackling something you, our listeners, were really curious about: Neil Gaiman's American Gods.
Yeah. For anyone who really wants to understand a topic without getting lost in the details, we're going to unpack the beginning of this book, really pull out those key insights, especially as we follow Shadow Moon and his, well, pretty bizarre experiences.
We're going to trace Shadow's steps as soon as he's released from prison. We're talking about navigating those strange encounters, the subtle clues that hint at a reality that's way more ancient and way more powerful than he could even begin to suspect. Think of it as your guided tour through those crucial opening chapters. It's where Gaiman really lays the groundwork for everything that's to come.
Okay, so Shadow's journey kicks off with a pretty big shock, right? He gets out of prison early, but not for being a model inmate, although he apparently was. Is because his wife Laura dies in a car accident.
Exactly. And the excerpts we have really highlight those, well, rather mixed feelings about this sudden freedom. The source even says, despite the bitterness and the terrible resentment he felt at being imprisoned, he breathed with relief. It's complex, isn't it?
It really is. Like, he's free, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And then there's that line, he lay down in bed, thinking that it was the first time he had lain in a bed as a free man, and the thought brought him less pleasure than he would have expected.
Oh, absolutely. That line really speaks volumes, doesn't it? It kind of sets this tone of like displacement right from the start.
Totally. Like,
Yeah.
where does he belong now? And then we get these glimpses into his time in prison. Apparently, he was pretty quiet, but he did share some kind of theory with his cellmate, Low-Key Lyswith.
Mm.
Now, we don't know what the theory is, but Low-Key's response to the idea of death is pretty grim.
Right. He says, it's like those jokes where someone kicks off their boots when they put the rope around their neck so they can't say, I told you so, to the friends who said they would die with their boots on.
Oh, wow. That's dark.
Yeah, it's a little bit bleak, isn't it? It kind of hangs in the air, doesn't it?
It totally does.
Yeah.
It's definitely foreshadowing the kind of unsettling atmosphere that follows Shadow,
Mm.
even when he's out of prison. Then he meets with his parole officer, Mr. Jones. We find out Shadow's 32, looks younger.
Right. And Mr. Jones even says, healthy life.
Oh, yeah, that line.
Yeah.
The irony isn't lost there, considering he's just gotten out of prison.
Right.
And apparently he had an exemplary record while he was inside.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about this interaction is that Shadow wants to share those prison theories with Mr. Jones, but he stops himself.
Smart move.
Exactly. He knows it's better to just play the part, act like he's learned his lesson. And I think that kind of awareness, that practicality is going to be pretty important as he navigates this new, unpredictable reality.
Totally agree. Okay, so Shadow's out. He's dealing with this huge loss and this feeling that he's not really free, not in the way he thought he would be.
Mm-hmm.
And then almost immediately, he starts having these strange encounters, these little, almost like omens, The first one is with a guy named Sam Fetisher, who starts talking about tectonic plates as a way to talk about unseen forces.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating analogy. Sam says, it's like when they start moving and North America slides over South America, you don't want to get caught in the middle.
Ooh, that's a powerful image. What do you think he's really getting at there?
Well, if we look at the bigger picture, I think it's subtly hinting at this larger conflict brewing in the background of the novel. It's almost like a suggestion that the reality Shadow thinks he knows is actually shifting and changing in ways he can't even perceive yet.
That's a little unsettling.
Definitely. And it really gets under Shadow's skin, too. He can't sleep, and then on the plane, on his way to Laura's funeral, he has this really intense dream. What stands out to you about that dream?
Okay, that dream is wild. So he's in this dark place. It feels underground. And there's this man with a buffalo head.
Right. And the man says he's one of the forgotten.
Yes. And he gives Shadow this cryptic message. Changes are coming. Certain decisions will need to be made. What does it all mean?
Well, that dream is super important. It immediately signals that there's something ancient and powerful at work here, something beyond what we normally understand. And it suggests that these forgotten beings, these gods, they still have a role to play.
Okay, I'm already hooked. Then the plane lands, and it's this jarring experience, both literally and figuratively. Shadow tries to ditch Mr. Wednesday, the weird guy he met on the plane, at this tiny airport. But of course it doesn't go to plan.
Of course not. This is Gaiman we're talking about. There's that unexpected encounter in the airport restroom, and Mr. Wednesday, who Shadow thought was asleep, knows his name.
Right. and he offers Shadow a job. It's so creepy, that feeling that Wednesday knows things he shouldn't. And the source material even describes his smile as like a fox eating carrion from a barbed wire fence.
Oh, yeah. That's not a comforting image, is it?
Not at all. But despite all the red flags, Shadow, who really doesn't have many other options, he takes the job. And from there, we start seeing these really strange interactions, these little glimpses of something unseen happening all around him.
Absolutely. We get that scene in the red lit room, remember, with the man and the woman placing money under a statue that has no face.
Oh, yeah. Like some kind of ritual?
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's so clear that there's this whole hidden layer to society, this place where ancient rituals and beliefs are still happening just out of sight.
It's like we're peeking into this secret world, even just for a moment.
It really is.
Yeah.
Then we have Shadow and Mr. Wednesday at the bar, and they meet Sweeney the Mad. The whole thing with the honey meat is super strange, but Sweeney's reaction to Shadow, seemingly knowing why the clock's stuck at 11:20, is really important, I think.
Yeah, that part was weird. But then Wednesday says, I know why.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's huge because it suggests that Wednesday is somehow connected to all these strange happenings. And then there's the way Sweeney reacts, all volatile and intense.
Oh, yeah, like he knows something really bad is about to happen.
Exactly. Then there's the arm wrestling match. Mr. Wednesday, this seemingly ordinary old guy, he displays this incredible strength against Shadow. It's another sign that things are not what they seem.
Yeah, and then Shadow wakes up in Wednesday's car with no memory of how he got there. I mean, come on, how does that even happen?
Right. It's like Shadow is being pulled deeper and deeper into this world, and he's losing track of himself along the way. It's that recurring motif of memory loss. It's like these gaps in his experience.
Gaps in reality, almost.
Yeah, I think so. And then the limousine ride, right, with the young guy smoking something that smells like burning electronics. It just gets weirder and weirder.
Burning electronics. Who smokes something that smells like that? And that guy's obsessed with what Wednesday's doing, but Shadow have absolutely no clue.
Right. It really highlights how Shadow's in the dark here, just being pulled along for the ride. And then there's that cryptic comment the guy makes about the fucking dominant paradigm. It's such a strange thing to say.
So what do you make of that, the dominant paradigm?
Well, when you think about the whole book, I think it refers to the modern world, with its technology and media and rational thought, all the things that have kind of overshadowed the old ways, the old gods. It's this tiny line, but it speaks volumes about the central conflict of the story.
The battle between the old and the new.
Exactly. And then finally, after all that strangeness, Shadow arrives at the Motel America. And in this seemingly ordinary place, the full weight of Laura's absence really hits him.
Yeah, he's technically free, but his life is, well, it's shattered.
Exactly. He could be back at their apartment, surrounded by her things. But the source says he knew that he would not be able to stand it, to breathe the same air that she had breathed, to sleep in the bed where they had made love and argued and slept. It's just too painful. And that vulnerability, that feeling of being adrift, I think it makes him even more susceptible to this bizarre path he's now on.
Totally. And then that path leads him straight back into dreams, right? She has this unsettling vision of forgotten gods, gods with octopus faces, and gods that were no more than mummified hands or falling rocks or forest fires. I mean, that's just such a vivid image of fading belief.
It is. It's like Gaiman is showing us how these gods, these beliefs, they can fade and become almost like ghosts. And the source even says, gods die, and when they truly die, no one mourns or remembers them. It's haunting, isn't it?
Really haunting. But then it goes on to say, ideas are more difficult to eliminate.
Yes. And that's so important because it raises the question of, well, what happens to those beliefs, those ideas, even when the gods themselves are gone? What kind of power do they still hold?
I see what you mean. Then, in a truly shocking twist, Laura shows up in his motel room. But this isn't the Laura he knew. She smells like, well, decomposition mixed with flowers, and she knows about Robbie, the guy she was cheating with.
Laura's return as this, well, reanimated corpse is definitely one of the most shocking parts of the early chapters. And it raises so many questions. Like, what is she? What does she want? It's so unsettling.
Totally. And then there's that little detail, the fact that she asks for a cigarette, even though she supposedly quit.
Yeah.
And the way she talks about Robbie and her feelings for Shadow, it's also mixed up and confusing.
Yeah. Like, she calls him my big bear, my little puppy, but then she admits she went with Robbie to plan a surprise welcome home party, and she claims she broke things off with Robbie before the accident. It's a whole mess of half-truths and lingering feelings, all tangled up with the fact that she's dead.
It's disturbing and kind of heartbreaking at the same time. So from this ghostly encounter with his dead wife, Shadow is thrown into the company of actual old gods, Zernabog, Zoroyevichnaya, and Zoroyopolnoknaya. This scene in their apartment is so full of detail. It's like you can feel the history in that room.
I know, right? You have Chernobog's unfiltered cigarette and Wednesday's ornate gold lighter.
And they talk about coming to America and how they are just bad memories now in their homelands.
Yes, and that really emphasizes that central theme, that gods are shaped by belief, and when belief fades, so do they. They become these remnants of something that was once powerful.
Wow, that's profound. And then Zernabog challenges Shadow to this crazy game of checkers. I mean, the stakes are literally life or death here.
The source material puts it pretty bluntly. If I win, I'll smash your head in with the hammer.
Yeah, that's not messing around.
Not at all. And that game of checkers is a turning point, I think. It shows how dangerous these old gods can be, how high the stakes really are in this world Shadow has stumbled into.
So Shadow wins a game, which means Chernobog agrees to help Wednesday. But Cernabog wins a game too, which means he gets to kill Shadow later. Talk about a precarious situation.
It's incredibly tense, isn't it?
And then there's the interaction with the Zoria sisters. Zoroyevichnaya gives Shadow a fortune, saying he'll have a happy life with many children. Talk about a contrast to his current situation.
Oh, completely. And what's really interesting about the Zoria sisters is how different their personalities are. Like, Zoroyevichnaya, she's almost kind in her own way. And she talks about how things have changed, how they don't have servants anymore.
Yeah, it's another reminder that these gods, they aren't what they used to be.
Right. And then there's Zoroyopolnoknaya, the Midnight Sister, all mysterious and powerful. She's described as taller than either of her sisters, with hair as white as the snow on the roof and wearing nothing but a white nightgown.
And she has that silver dollar.
Yes. That silver dollar, clearly it's important. And she seems to have a particular interest in Shadow, which makes me think he might be more important than he realizes.
I'm getting chills. This is good. Then we get that little excerpt from Mr. Ibis's diary, where he talks about American history. He calls it a great fiction built on the idea of pilgrims and an empty land.
Oh, that's so provocative, isn't it? It really challenges the way we think about American history.
Right. It's like he's saying there's a whole other story that's been buried, a story about the people and beliefs that were already here.
Exactly. And I think it's setting the stage for understanding how both the old and the new gods fit into this constantly changing idea of America.
Then we have Essie Trigoin's story. She's this young woman who's transported to America. Her story is fascinating because it's all about how these old world beliefs, the Piskies, they take root in this new land.
Essie's story is like a microcosm of the whole thing. It shows how beliefs don't disappear when people move. They evolve and adapt. Even her marriage and the way people react to it, it shows how these beliefs persist and change over time.
It's like a living history of belief. So, after leaving the Zoria sisters and Zernabog, Shadow and Wednesday are back on the road. And Wednesday tells Shadow to drive to the First Illinois Bank for this, unusual deposit.
Let's just say Wednesday has his own way of doing things, shall we? Taking money from deposit slips. Not exactly conventional banking.
Not at all. It's another sign that Wednesday's, not exactly playing by the rules.
He's a trickster through and through.
Next stop, the House on the Rock. Apparently, it's the place to consult the Norns.
Who are represented by this creepy gypsy fortune teller mannequin. Yeah, that whole place is just bizarre.
Oh, yeah. The carousel, the car covered in tiles, the Burma shave signs, and then there's that enormous mechanical whale.
It's like walking into a fever dream. I think the House on the Rock is this perfect reflection of, the strange and fragmented nature of belief in America. It's like a museum of the weird and wonderful.
And speaking of weird and wonderful, we meet Mr. Nancy. He's that impeccably dressed old black man who instantly recognizes Shadow as working for the one-eyed bastard.
Mr. Nancy, what a character. And we know him as Anansi, the spider god from West African folklore. His presence just adds another layer to this whole tapestry of old gods in America.
Yeah, and he makes that simple but profound statement about how old gods need prayers.
It's a reminder that these gods, they rely on belief to survive. Without it, they fade.
Wow, that's heavy. And then they sneak back into the House on the Rock through these emergency exits.
And they find that hidden room, remember, full of those creepy carousel horses and those mannequin angels. It's eerie, almost like another dream.
And that's where we get the excerpt from Thomas Bailey Aldrich's poem about all the different people coming to America, bringing their gods with them.
It's such a powerful poem. It really captures that sense of America as this melting pot, not just of people, but of beliefs, of gods.
It's beautiful and chaotic at the same time.
Definitely. Then Shadow experiences the giant carousel, the lights go out, he's riding through the stars. He hears this primal rhythm.
It sounds like he's having a religious experience almost.
I think it's symbolic. It's like he's going deeper into this other reality where the lines between the mundane and the mythical are blurred.
And then we're suddenly on a beach. Mr. Wednesday's riding a giant wolf. And then another wolf just appears out of nowhere.
Oh, the wolves. They're probably Jerry and Fricke, Odin's companions in Norse mythology.
The Wednesday's really Odin.
I think it's pretty clear at this point. And those wolves appearing out of thin air, it's like myth is literally breaking into reality.
This is wild.
Oh.
And then we get that crazy story about the old monkey and the tiger's testicles.
Oh, yeah, that story.
What was up with that?
Well, Mr. Nancy, or Nancy, is a trickster god. And that story, it's absurd, it's shocking, but it makes you think about power and vulnerability and how sometimes things don't go the way you expect.
I guess so. Their next encounter is with Mamaji, who we know is Kali. She's this incredibly powerful presence, shifting between a seemingly ordinary old woman and this fierce goddess with skulls around her neck. And she doesn't seem too impressed with Wednesday.
Mama G has seen it all, you know? She's ancient, she's wise, and she's not afraid to put Wednesday in his place.
Yeah, she pretty much tells him she's not paid to question his plans.
But she definitely has her suspicions. Like, she says, perhaps you're trying to go out in a halo of glory.
Well, that's interesting. It's like, even among these old gods, there's this distrust, this weariness.
I think so. They've been around for a long time, witnessed a lot of things. It's bound to create some cynicism, wouldn't you say?
I would. And then things take a much darker turn. Shadow's abducted. He is interrogated by these shadowy figures, Mr. Stone and Mr. Wood, and they say they're from the private sector.
That abduction is a huge escalation. And those guys, Stone and Wood, they represent something new, something even more shadowy and unsettling than the old gods.
It's like we've entered a whole new level of conspiracy here.
Absolutely. And then, while Shadow's being held captive, he has these feverish dreams, and it seems like they're connected to the silver dollar he got from Zoria Pulunaknaya.
He has that vision of Silverlight, the moon, and Zoria Pulunaya herself. And he finds a way to escape the pain through these dreams. It's almost like the silver dollar is some kind of magical object.
I think it's a symbol of protection and maybe even a connection to a deeper power. And that connection to Zoria Pulunaknaya, it just keeps getting stronger.
It's like they're fated to be connected somehow.
I think you might be right. And then, as if things couldn't get any weirder, Laura shows up again, right there in Shadow's confinement. And she casually mentions killing the guards. There's blood everywhere.
It's a really gruesome scene. And Laura's just so nonchalant about it all, like it's no big deal.
Right. It's like her death has fundamentally changed her. She's no longer bound by the same rules, the same morality.
She tells Shadow to leave, and he does. He ends up hitching a ride. And who does he run into but Sam again? And she's amazingly calm about hearing his insane story.
I know. It's like Sam is in on this whole thing. Like she understands what's happening on a deeper level.
And she even mentions Lucy. You know, the leprechaun.
Yeah, exactly. Like she's part of this whole network of people who are aware of the supernatural.
Then she throws out this huge question. Would you believe me if I told you that all the gods imagined by human beings are still among us today? And she mentions these new gods and a war that's brewing. It's like Shadow's the only one who's in the dark here.
Sam's a real catalyst, I think. She's the one who explicitly lays out the central conflict of the novel, the war between the old gods and the new.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But then we get a break from Shadow's story, and we meet Salim, this immigrant who's struggling to make it in America. His experiences really highlight those cultural clashes, you know, those differences in beliefs and expectations.
He has those frustrating encounters with Mr. Blanding and those loud American businessmen. And then there's the taxi driver who talks about Jen and angels. It's like these older beliefs are still very much alive, existing right alongside the modern world.
I think Salim's story is important because it shows another perspective on America, the perspective of those who come from elsewhere, bringing their own traditions and beliefs with them.
It's a reminder that America is more than just one story.
Exactly. Then we're whisked off to Ibis and Jokel's funeral home. And Mr. Ibis drops this bombshell about ancient Egyptians trading in Cairo, Illinois, thousands of years ago.
I know. Like, what?
It's like he's challenging the whole established narrative of American history. And then there's Mr. Jekyll talking about weighing the heart against a feather.
That's a clear reference to ancient Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife.
Right. It's like these old gods, they've been subtly influencing America for centuries in ways we don't even realize.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it. Then Laura pops up again, this time at the funeral home, and she tells Shadow she's going to kill Mr. Jekyll, but not him.
And then she makes that incredibly crude remark about the bishop. Classic Laura.
Yeah, Laura definitely has a way with words. Her focus is always on Shadow, even in death, it seems.
Absolutely. Later, Shadow runs into Sweeney again, who's desperate to get his lucky gold coin back.
Oh, yeah, the coin.
And Shadow's forced to admit that he gave it to Wednesday. Sweeney's reaction is intense. He blames Shadow for his impending doom, even demands a wake.
And then, the next morning, Shadow finds Sweeney dead.
It's another reminder that even those connected to the supernatural, they're not invincible. And it's another consequence of Shadow's actions, even if he didn't intend it.
After Sweeney's death, Wednesday starts talking about all these classic con games. It's fascinating the way he explains how they work, how they play on people's greed, and their desire to believe in a lucky break.
And when you think about it, those con games, they're kind of like how the old gods might operate in the modern world, using their charm and their tricks to try and regain some of their lost power.
That's a really interesting connection. Then suddenly, Wednesday's gone. He leaves Shadow with a bus ticket and an apartment key in another city.
And his farewell is so cryptic, he just says, everything will be all right. It's like he's deliberately leaving Shadow to figure things out on his own.
It's a huge turning point. Shadow's completely alone now. And on that bus ride, he falls asleep and re-enters his dream world, the buffalo-headed man's back. This time, he points to a ray of light.
Yeah, and then the dream becomes a nightmare. Shadow feels like he's being crushed, buried alive, and then he wakes up on red clay. It's like he's being reborn.
It's a powerful image. He wakes up near Lakeside, and he's picked up by Heinzelman, who starts talking about his car, Tessie, and his trouble sleeping. Heinzelman seems like a real character, a little eccentric, but kind.
Heinzelman's a classic small-town guy. He loves his town, he loves his car, and he has all these stories, these little details that make Lakeside feel real.
But even in this seemingly peaceful place, Shadow has these disturbing dreams. Darkness, shadowy wings, the icy lake. He feels like he's watching something he shouldn't be seeing.
Those dreams are definitely foreshadowing. Something's not quite right in Lakeside. I feel like there are secrets lurking beneath the surface.
And then the police show up. They're questioning Shadow. And Chad Mulligan, the officer, sees to know Shadow by another name, Mike Ainsel.
Oh, the mistaken identity.
Right.
It adds a whole new layer of mystery. And it makes you wonder, who is Shadow really? What's his past?
Big questions. Despite this encounter with the police, Shadow does manage to settle into Lakeside. He meets Missy Gunther, his neighbor, and Heinzelman shows up again with a welcome basket. He tells all these stories about the town and the people.
Heinzelman's so sweet, bringing Shadow that basket. And those stories, they really paint a picture of Lakeside, this quirky little town with its own history and its own secrets.
Then there's that weird poker game in the bar. One of the players disappears, and the other guy gives this cryptic advice to the waitress about Treasure Island.
So strange. It's another one of those moments where you realize that the normal rules don't quite apply in this world. Anything can happen.
At the library, Shadow sees this big oil portrait of Abraham Lincoln. And he spends some time in the basement, which is full of books. He sees Chad Mulligan interacting with Marguerite Olson, the teenager, and there's this protective feeling there.
I think that scene shows us the more human side of Chad Mulligan. He's not just a cop. He cares about the people in his town.
Then Shadow tries to do a coin trick.
And it fails miserably. It's a reminder that even though he's trying to start a new life, his past, his connection to Wednesday, it's still there.
That night, he has another unsettling dream, this time with a tower of skulls and a thunderbird. And then he gets that angry call from Wednesday.
Oh yeah, that's a huge moment. Wednesday reveals that he knows what Shadow's dreaming.
That's so creepy. How is that even possible?
It suggests that Wednesday has a deeper connection to Shadow than we realized, a way of knowing his innermost thoughts and experiences.
It's a little scary, actually. Then, Wednesday shows up in Lakeside, and he has this very tense conversation with Easter about the diminishing significance of her holiday.
He doesn't hold back. He tells her, they vocalize your name, but it means nothing to them. Absolutely nothing. Ouch.
That's harsh.
It is. But it's also a stark reminder of the struggle these old gods are facing. Their relevance is fading in the modern world.
And Easter, she's really hurt by his words. But then Wednesday actually apologizes. It's a brief moment, but it shows that even these powerful beings, they have feelings too.
They're not just these distant, mythical figures.
While all this is happening, there's a search party going on for a missing girl in town. Shadow meets Callie Knopf, the girl's sister, who describes Lakeside as this perfect place. But there's this sense of emptiness underneath it all.
It's like Callie's description of Lakeside is a little too good to be true.
It is. It makes you wonder if there are darker secrets hidden beneath the surface.
I think there are. And then we shift to this historical narrative. We hear about Wututu and Agasu, twins who were sold into slavery. And their story highlights that long and painful journey of beliefs across continents.
It's a powerful reminder of how these old gods came to America not out of choice, but because of human suffering.
And despite that suffering, their beliefs endured. They adapted and transformed.
Then we hear about Mama Zuzu and the development of hoodoo in Saint Domingue. Again, it's a story of resilience, of preserving and adapting traditions in the face of incredible adversity.
Mama Zuzu's story is a testament to the power of belief to survive even the most brutal conditions.
Back in the present, we see Mr. Town reporting to Mr. World about losing track of Shadow.
And we learn about the deaths of Mahdi in stone.
Right. And Mr. World says, "We are writing the future in letters of fire." It's clear that this war between the old and new gods is escalating.
Mr. World's not messing around. He's determined to win no matter the cost.
Later, Wednesday tries to explain that Spider Shadow encountered. He says it was a manifestation of the Matrix, a search engine.
I think he's trying to make sense of the supernatural in modern terms. And he warns Shadow, always expect the worst. It saves so much time.
Wise words, but not very comforting.
Not at all. Then Shadow meets Whiskey Jack, who seems to know a lot about Shadow's dreams, even about Laura being in the land of the dead with the wolf. And he tells Shadow to go to Harry Blue Jay and that Wednesday's not welcome back.
Whiskey Jack's a fascinating character. He seems to represent a different kind of power, a different way of seeing the world.
He's Nanaboso, a trickster figure from Native American mythology, and his presence really adds another layer of complexity to this whole conflict.
Then they go to Harry Blue Jays, and on the way, they pass a Catholic church. The priest is outside, smoking.
It's like a visual representation of those conflicting beliefs, those different worlds existing side by side.
Shadow runs into Marguerite Olsen again, and then Chad Mulligan has this awkward conversation with Shadow about her.
Oh yeah, he's clearly smitten with Marguerite. It's kind of sweet.
It is. And it's a reminder that even amidst all this supernatural craziness, there's still room for human connection, for love.
Absolutely. And then, in another shocking twist, Laura shows up in Lakeside, and she's wearing Sweeney's gold coin.
That coin keeps showing up.
It definitely seems like it's more than just a lucky charm.
Laura says she felt a call, a hunger to be with Shadow. And she knew he was in Lakeside. But she doesn't know who or what was calling her. It's all very mysterious.
I think it suggests that there are forces at work here that even Laura doesn't understand.
Then we hear these news reports in the background. An unidentified shooter. Strange behavior from a guy named Terry the Troll. Evenson, a community of hermits dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. It's like the world itself is becoming unhinged.
It's like the supernatural is bleeding into the real world.
Then we have that scene with Bilquis. She's a prostitute now. It's really sad, actually, to see how far she's fallen.
It shows how these old gods have been forced to adapt to survive in the modern world. And sometimes those adaptations are pretty desperate.
Missy Gunther, Shadow's neighbor, makes a few comments about him. She calls him Grand and says he has this quality that starts with M. It's a seemingly small thing, but it makes you wonder if there's something more to Shadow than meets the eye.
I think so. There's definitely something special about him, even.